I've seen 2 Mr. Rogers movies this year. I've cried at 2 Mr. Rogers movies this year. Is that a sign of some sort of deep-seated emotional issue that I should really seek professional help for? Nope, it's a sign of the brand new episode of the Everyman Movie Review. This week we're talking about A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. Of course, if you're not as big of a film buff as me, you may not have recognized that little bit of a reference in the opening. Helen Bonham Carter from Fight Club, right after she meets the narrator, who we think is named Tyler Durden, but obviously is not by the end of the movie. If you're not as big of a movie buff as I am, you may not have gotten that little bit of a reference there at the beginning. It's Helen Bonham Carter from Fight Club, where she says something to the effect of, you have issues, deep-seated emotional issues for which you should seek professional help. After walking out of my second Mr. Rogers movie in 12 months, having to hide the tears yet again, and having yet another woman who I am close to ask if something was wrong with me because I was crying so much, I started to ask some of those very questions to myself. And if that kind of gives you a preview of the kind of movie we're going to be talking about today, well, I hope you know what you're getting into. But strap in, here we go. Let's get through the pleasantries first. A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood was written by Micah Fitzerman-Blue and Noah Harpster. It's, of course, starring Tom Hanks as Fred Rogers, Matthew Rhys as Lloyd Vogel, Chris Cooper as Jerry Vogel, and a huge, fantastic supporting cast of folks that you have definitely seen before in something else, as well as some newcomers that I hadn't recognized before, although I was told by someone I went to the movie with that they are kind of in that biopic sphere. Now, I don't usually watch a lot of biopics, and I was assuming going into A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood that I was going to see a biopic. If you had seen any of the marketing materials, it was clearly a Mr. Rogers movie. It was about Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. It was a follow-up to the documentary earlier this year about Mr. Rogers, except it wasn't. Now, something that I vaguely remembered in the back of my mind was the Esquire article that was talking about heroes. I didn't remember the writer was Tom Junod. I didn't remember that Mr. Rogers was on the cover. I remember that Mr. Rogers was part of an Esquire article, and I had no idea that would be the story that I was walking into. Now, I think that if you've been with me for a while, you know that I don't find this to be a spoiler, because I want you to go into the movie understanding more than I did when I walked in. This is not a Mr. Rogers documentary. This is a story about someone else coming into the sphere of Mr. Rogers and how it impacted them. But Mr. Rogers has an impact on everyone, an amazingly huge impact. That is felt completely in this movie. If Mr. Rogers is the sun of the solar system that we're talking about here, then Tom in real life, Lloyd in the movie, is a random meteor, a comet, that is passing by and gets captured up in his gravity. By doing that, changes his life forever. And of course, you can't tell the story of that comet, that meteorite, without telling the story of the sun, the star, Mr. Rogers. And I had the great fortune of going to see this with my sister while I was at home for Thanksgiving. I don't know if any of my LA friends would have wanted to go see it. I'm sure that they do, and I probably will go see it again with them. But we have a bit of a tradition while we're at home for Thanksgiving that we go see a movie on Thanksgiving night. It's something that we can do to get away from the rest of the family and just her and I go and do something. We brought along one of her friends this time, but it's kind of our thing. And I was really surprised that she wanted to see Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. But I think that we both have really fond memories of Fred Rogers and the show. You know, being at my grandmother's house after school or on sick days, watching Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And I think that anyone in our age range or older or younger may have those same feelings. And if you have those same feelings, let me tell you, this is going to get you. It's going to get you real bad. You know, watching the documentary, maybe I should do a review of that. You know, I don't know if I can emotionally handle the weight of doing a review about that documentary. Just a little sidebar about the documentary. I watched that with my significant other. In the 2 years that we have been together, she has seen me cry exactly 0 times. And yet, watching that documentary on HBO, on our couch, I was crying like a child. I was crying like a hurt, injured baby. And all that she could muster, God bless her, in her confusion in that moment, was to ask if something had happened to me as a child. And Mr. Rogers been on the TV when that happened. And did I want to turn it off? I love her to death. Thankful to her, because obviously I think that is a response. Maybe not the best response, but it's a response. But it's not about something bad that happened. It's about something good that happened. Mr. Rogers, I think, represents the best part of my childhood. Someone who thought that I was special, which of course I thought I was special, even when no one else might have. Someone who put learning new lessons and going on adventures above everything else. It didn't matter whether you could play soccer very well. Did you try? Well, that's the important thing. And remember, you might not play soccer very well, but you can do this really well. And Johnny, who plays soccer real well, can't do that. And so we're all equal in that way. We are all equal in that we can find the thing that we're good at, and we're not necessarily good at everything. And I'm finding myself getting a little choked up while I even think about it, because I wish I had a little more of that in my adulthood. I wish we had an adult Mr. Rogers to tell us that everything was going to be all right, and that no matter how scary things got, that we were bigger than the things that scared us. Maybe something did happen to me as a kid while I was watching Mr. Rogers, because I cannot fathom this response that I am having just thinking about watching a show on PBS when I was a kid. Anyway, so I just want to kind of break the fourth wall more than I usually do and just say I had to take a break there to try and get myself under control, because I was having some sort of roller coaster runaway moment. Well, I can't explain it. But anyway, I think I see a lot of myself in Lloyd Vogel, and I think the way that he sees the world is the way that I see the world. We are both incredibly cynical. We both come at every situation thinking that we have a handle on it, that we know exactly what's going on, even when everyone else might fall for the game or for the skit that the world is putting on, that the actors are putting on. And I think that maybe that is why it hit me so hard. I didn't have the same kind of childhood that he did. I think that we had similar outcomes from the childhood. Again, this fictional character in the movie that I watched. But, my dad didn't leave. My mom didn't die. My parents are still together. I'm very happy about that. But I do feel like we were treated in opposite ways. Being ignored versus being like really looked at. But I think it had the exact same effect, that the feeling of just wanting to be seen for who you are and not for who you can be, or in Lloyd's case, being seen at all. I think it just really struck a nerve with me. And I don't know if somebody who had what they would consider an ideal childhood, if it would impact them that same way. But I also don't know if Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, the show, would have been the show for you. I don't know if you would get lost in the land of make-believe. Here's another thing, too. I didn't have a huge fantasy life growing up. I found it really hard to lose myself in those make-believe situations. I don't have an imaginary friend. There is nothing here. I don't know what you mean to say about that. So I think it was interesting for me to see an adult who could try and help guide me to those things. We have a whole land, and you don't have to make believe, because you're actually going to go to a place and you're going to see a thing. And I realize I'm talking more about the show Mr. Rogers than I am about the movie, A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. As much as I say it's not a movie about Mr. Rogers, like I said, it is a movie about Mr. Rogers. It's about somebody being captured into that presence. And I do want to take a couple minutes to talk about specifics from the movie. So while we're here, let's just say that spoilers are about to come. So if you don't want to hear the spoilers, skip on down to the next time down below, because the spoilers are going to start right now. So I don't know what I expected once I kind of understood what the story was. Maybe I thought that everything worked out. Maybe I thought that it was going to be a happily ever after. And, it's not a fiction story. It's based on real life, even though obviously they took some liberties. I think that my biggest reaction just comes from seeing Fred Rogers as he was. The documentary that I saw earlier this year was really about the show. And you saw a little bit of him in the back, but to see him at his house and living a relatively plain life despite being as famous as he is, and engaging with kids on the street, which I hope and assume, but I hope was a real story. Being on the train with people, hiring a former government agent to try and help him get out of these public situations. There's so much that goes on, and he was so genuine. And God, I hope that was real. And maybe I'm the sucker now. Maybe I'm falling in because I think I want him to be that, and maybe that made him that. Maybe that makes me think it's more real. But like Lloyd's wife, Andrea, says, don't ruin my childhood. I can say for sure that if one good memory came out of my childhood, it was my relationship with Fred Rogers and my time in Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. I didn't know he was so religious. I didn't know that he and his wife were together for so long. I think I have actually retold the story that he was a ex-Navy SEAL or a sniper or whatever, and that is clearly not true. He went into psychology a little bit and teaching, and then started the show, and stayed in Pittsburgh most of his life, and the model and just everything. I mean, it's like there's spoilers, but there's not really spoilers. I mean, you're just following him along. And I mean, I guess the big thing about Lloyd making his dad wait outside for 3 days, and then he left, and then he really just wants to make amends because he's dying. And I don't know whether I wanted him to die without getting that satisfaction or not, but I almost felt like it had to end up well because Fred is involved, and Fred's not going to let that go out bad. You know what I mean? And I mean, just to see like the end notes there that they were friends until the end of their lives. Yeah, that's really something, I guess. I really wish I could have met Mr. Rogers. I really wish I could have had this kind of experience, to be in his presence like that, to spend so much time with him, to ask him questions. I think jealousy is probably one of the emotions that I most came out of this movie with. And as I'm sitting here trying to review it and trying to come up with some spoilers, I guess, for this section, I'm realizing that I think I had such a visceral emotional reaction to it that maybe the specifics just kind of washed over me. And I don't necessarily remember everything about it. The genialness of Fred Rogers as the character. Maybe that's why people think that they meet angels, or that they have a religious experience with, some sort of deity, that they just meet someone that is so good and so pure. But as Fred points out, he works on it every day. And as his wife points out, he's an angry guy. You don't see the same Fred that I see. And I feel like I have that in common with Mr. Rogers, actually. Public versus the private persona. But maybe people who think that they meet a deity or an angel are just meeting someone who has such good control of their emotions that they can just wash that goodness and that good feeling over you, and you feel like you're better for it when you get there. And I guess I really didn't talk about any spoilers. I mean, nothing really specific, but, you got a little spoiler section. What do you want? Anyway, let's bring everybody on back now. So we are going to say the spoilers are done, and everybody's joining us again right now. I will say that one thing about this movie is it's starring Tom Hanks, and I have begun to have a bit of a problem, which Corey, the other half of the You're the Anthem podcast, has pointed out for some time now. And that is not being able to see the character for Tom Hanks. He's so well known, he's so distinctive, that I think a lot of times I start to see him instead of the character, and that's not so good. There are characters that he's gotten lost in, and I've appreciated them, but I do think that it's becoming a bit much in some of the characters. A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood is not one of those stories. I will say that the first thing you see on camera is Tom Hanks as Fred Rogers on screen, and for maybe the first 3 minutes I saw Tom Hanks. Maybe this is a spoiler, maybe not. It's the first 3 minutes, folks. Some of you won't even see it when you go to the movies, but it's the intro to an episode. It's, Mr. Rogers coming in and singing a song and trading out the sport coat for the sweater and the dress shoes for the tennis shoes. And he's singing, and he intros whatever the topic of the day is going to be, which I won't spoil for you. But somehow in that transition, they found a way to make me forget it was Tom Hanks. And just to remember, hey, this is Fred Rogers. This is who I'm coming to see. And I did share with my sister at the end of the movie and her friend that I felt like I am glad that, by the way, stay for a few minutes right at the end. There is a short clip of the real Mr. Rogers, and I'm glad they threw it in there because I wanted to be reminded who the real Fred Rogers was. I was starting to think of Tom Hanks in his character as Fred Rogers, so it was nice to come out of there at the end and see the real Fred Rogers and get back on track. But of course, you've been sticking around this long because you want to know what did I think overall, what is my recommendation, and I've probably given it away, as I always do. Waste of time for you to watch, because in the first minute and a half, you know what I'm going to say, right? If a movie can make me cry, it must be an emotional roller coaster. So not only my love for Fred Rogers, not only my love for the show, but a fantastic story, and a story about someone else. A story about a third party that tells the story of the person you're really there to see. It's masterfully done, well acted, and I think everything about it is fantastic. What I remember from between the tears and the crying and the muffling of my sighs and sobs. So A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood gets a thumbs up from me. Go find it at your local Cineplex. It's an independent movie, so it may not be in theaters long. You're going to want to go see it as soon as possible, so make sure you do that. Go check it out wherever you can. Support whoever made this movie, because maybe we'll get a third Mr. Rogers movie in 3 years, and I'll get a third chance to cry, right? Anyway, maybe you'll cry, maybe you won't. Maybe you're damaged like me, maybe you're not. Either way, I think you'll enjoy the movie, especially if you are anywhere between the ages of, 25 and 50. Anytime that you might have watched Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, you're going to enjoy this movie. Well, there you have it. Yet another episode of the Everyman Movie Reviews in the books. At the top here, I want to thank my patrons. I would not be able to do this without you guys. I just went over to B&H and I got some brand new equipment, and that is all thanks to the support that I get from you. So thank you guys so very much. I can't say it enough. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And hey, do you want to be one of my patrons? Do you want to support all of the new projects that I have going on? It is super easy. Go on over to patreon.com. That's patreon.com/Robert N. Cheek. You can donate at any level, even as little as $1 a month. That gets you access, and you'll be able to catch up to everything that I am working on. They get early access to all the videos. They get access to the books. They get thank yous in the books, thank yous in the videos. Everything that I produce, I make sure and get it to them early, and I make sure to thank them during the process. So go on over to patreon.com, patreon.com/Robert N. Cheek, and become one of my supporters. Let me know that you have a vested interest in the things that I'm working on. And of course, you can find me for free on all your social networks at Robert N. Cheek. That's going to be on Instagram, Tumblr, Twitter, Snapchat, over on TikTok, where I got some new videos coming. My new favorite thing is to make memes with my nephew. You are not going to want to miss that. So at Robert N. Cheek on all your social networks. And of course, make sure you're checking out robertncheek.com. That's where you're always going to find the latest updates to what's going on, what projects I'm working on, and what I have cooking that maybe nobody else knows about. You can sign up for the email list there, and of course, directions to Patreon, directions to Oh the Anthem, directions to everything that I have going on. That'll all be located right there. Finally, you're probably watching this video on YouTube at youtube.com/Rob Cheek, but don't forget it's also available in podcast form over at anchor.fm/Everyman Movie Reviews. Now, at that link, you'll be able to find any of your sources of podcasts, where it's on Apple or Google or Pocket Cast or Dogcatcher, Stitcher, everywhere. Just go to anchor.fm/Everyman Movie Reviews and you'll be able to find your link so you can have it on your podcatcher of choice. And of course, the shows are very similar, but there are a few very key differences. So if you do want to check out the podcast, make sure you go to anchor.fm/Everyman Movie Reviews. You can throw another slash in front, put message. It'll let you leave a voicemail for me, and with your permission, I'll actually use those on the show. You'll also hear some promos that they don't hear here on YouTube, but people on YouTube, you guys will get some stuff that they don't get on Anchor. So maybe check out both, huh? How about that? But however you consume your content, I've got it for you. Podcast, video, you'll be able to find it. So thank you guys once again for joining me. Look for the next episode coming very soon. New episodes every Thursday, on the dot, no matter what. And another episode sometime in the week in between. Of course, I'm also working on the next episode of Rob Explains Everything. I'm thinking the Mandela Effect. So if you don't know what that is, make sure you go over to YouTube and subscribe, hit the notification bell so that you know when I update with my latest episode. A lot of stuff going on for me, a lot of stuff going on for you. So I appreciate you taking the time to check out this episode of the Everyman Movie Reviews. So until next time, thank you guys for joining me, and have a great week, everybody.